Chapter 15. The western horizon had darkened to a purple twilight, quickly fading to black. A fish jumped nearby, the splash of the water simply accentuating the scene over the quiet shush of the ocean waves. "That was a big one," Alan said, nodding to the boat's starboard side. Sarah peered over the starboard gunwale, eyes scanning the water beneath them. The UV-flood light array cast a net of white light around the rubble, the shadows only encroaching some 5 meters away from the ring. The fish that had jumped, at least she guessed it was the same one, lingered near the surface just a meter or two from the Zode. She didn't know what kind it was, as she didn't know shit about fish, but it looked large enough to swallow a human infant. "Jesus," she said. "Fucking huge." Alan chuckled. "They're growing big out here. You only saw the tiny ones earlier. Clownfish don't get all that big." "Yeah, but that's monstrous." He shrugged. "Like I said, they're growing big. You haven't seen a black bass yet." "How big are they?" "Who cares?" he said, standing from the dais for a short stretch. "They taste damn good. That's all that matters to me." "You only think with your stomach?" Alan belched and sheepishly grinned. "Nah, I sometimes use my brain." He picked up a device that looked like a controller for a game console. "See this?" Sarah nodded. "You going to play an FPS or something?" His smile widened. "No, going to show you how to pilot the ROV." "Ah, something interesting finally," she said, joining him at the dais. Alan pointed to one of the displays. "See that? That's the ROV view. You've got a camera in front, one on either side, and one in the rear. Basically, you can see in all directions." Sarah frowned. "Can't see down?" He shook his head. "Unfortunately, no. Did I mention it's a shit ROV?" The drone's fore-camera showed the light array and the illuminated pile of rubble in the middle. She saw shadows moving beyond the lights, but ignored them. "What is it, like 10 meters from the arrays?" Sarah asked. "About that," Alan agreed. He moved the left stick forward, and the ROV smoothly accelerated. Just as it came within 2 or 3 meters, he pulled back, and the robot decelerated before moving backward through the water. "Use the other stick for up and down." The drone slowly descended near the ocean floor before rising again as he pushed forward on the right stick. "Easy peasy." The ROV's camera shuddered, and Alan growled. "Fucking current. It keeps drifting further out to the ocean, so we have to goose it every few minutes to keep it in place." "Okay," Sarah said. "No autopilot." "No, couldn't get that lucky. We usually use these to scout, not to loiter." Sarah chuckled. "Loitering above a monster." "Monster. Good description. Not sure what else you'd call it. Fucking thing is like something from a Lovecraft story." "I'll take your word for it. So when do we—"
"Salty! Salty!"
Rags' voice said over the radio. Alan gave Sarah a worried look before picking up the transmitter. "Salty, go."
"Hippie is infected and is in the water. Over."
Sarah felt a stab of confusion. Infected? In the... "Fuck me," she said, and snatched the transmitter out of Alan's hands. "Nest, explain symptoms." A pregnant pause lingered far too long for her liking. When Rags finally spoke, it seemed obvious why. She was trying not to cry.
"He left the stateroom, went to the deck, and flung himself overboard before Kojo could stop him."
"What are the symptoms?" Sarah said again, her patience wearing thin.
He
Rags broke off.
left oily-looking stains on the stairs, the bed, and the deck. Some of the varnish and even the carpet burned."
Alan looked at Sarah with pained eyes. "He's dead, isn't he?" Sarah didn't answer, but instead clicked the transmitter. "Has anyone touched the discharge?" The word sounded as icky as what it described.
"No, we managed to steer clear."
"Get a butane torch or something similar and a strong halogen," Sarah said. "Blast any spot you think he may have touched, especially if it left a mark. Do not, I repeat, do not attempt to clean or otherwise wipe up the substance. Set it on fire." "You realize they're on a boat, right?" Alan asked. Sarah glared at him. "They have fire extinguishers." Alan opened his mouth, maybe to suggest an alternative, but the look in her eyes made him think twice.
"Copy,"
Rag said after another pause. "Nest, do you have eyes on the body? Over."
"No, Salty. No eyes on the body. Kojo saw him go in, but it was too dark to know what happened. We turned on the floods, but no luck. Over."
Sarah handed the transmitter back to Alan. He seemed reluctant to take it, but finally did. After clearing his throat, he said in a weaker-than-normal voice, Hold, Nest.
Copy hold.
Alan clenched his free fist, his expression flattening. He looked in control again. What do you want to do? Sarah exhaled hard. She didn't want to answer that question because she had no idea what the answer was. Basically, they were fucked 9 ways to Sunday now. Keko had been contaminated. Moore would likely drop a Hellfire missile on the ship if she found out. But that was hardly the biggest concern. 1,000 meters away, something was swimming in the water that shouldn't be there, or even be on this planet. To make matters worse, it used to be one of the animals. If this were Ben Taub or even Miskatonic University, they could hunt it down or wait for daylight, smash every wall and pane of glass, and watch the sun burn it to cinders. Here, surrounded by the ocean without a single ray of the sun's assistance, hunting it was out of the question. It was almost certainly scouring the entire ocean for food, including the humans above the water's surface. Once it was big enough, there was no telling what it might do. Stay the course, Sarah said finally. What? Alan said. What do you mean? She pointed down. We still have an M2 down there, more than likely. We have UV light to fight and plenty of floodlights until we run out of power or you run the engines to recharge everything. Little point in the two of us leaving our post right now. Alan said grimly, and we're sitting ducks. Sarah nodded. We are, but the water here is relatively shallow. She jerked a thumb back toward Keko. Much deeper there, meaning that if we try and get back, and we capsize for whatever reason, there'll be no way to reach cover of any kind. Plus, movement is going to attract it. Alan blinked. It will? Are you sure? No, she wanted to say, but she thought she was right. The creature had always been drawn to movement in the past, so she doubted the ocean would be any different. The only real question was what the creature would do if it found them. Try to eat the boat? This whole aluminum? Alan nodded. Yeah, think so. Metal up to the tubes. Tubes. So the inflation material isn't... She stopped herself. No, it wouldn't be metal. He shook his head. Meaning the fucker could sink us. She shivered at the thought. At least M2 couldn't quickly damage Keko's hull. The Zode's tubes, on the other hand, would no doubt dissolve once M2 decided to snack. Yes, she admitted. It can. It can do that while we're sitting here above a UV light array, or it can do it while we're heading back to the ship. She shrugged. We stay the course. Alan narrowed his eyes. And Keko? If they burn everything and are diligent, they might be safe. Might be, Alan echoed. Any way we can ensure that? Kill anyone that looks sick? She offered. Alan's glare turned nuclear, bordering on real hate. That's not an option either. I know. They'd have to be burned. God, you're fucking cold, he said, and thumbed the transmitter. Nest, salty. Clean like our lives depend on it because they do. Arm everyone there with phosphorus. Get the portable UV lights out and dig in. You'll need to watch every ship cam there is.
Copy, Salty. Harper and Sinclair are in tow.
Good. Use them, but make sure they understand the danger. They touch something they shouldn't, and it's over. Repeat my order.
Saddle up with phosphorus. Destroy any discharge and any items or equipment that might have been exposed. Do not attempt to wipe, clean, or otherwise remove the material without fire. Over.
Alan nodded and dropped his eyes. He was probably thinking about Hippie and how he died hours and hours ago, although they had just gotten the word. Fuck you, M2, Sarah almost said aloud. Affirmative. Contact me if the situation changes. Salty out, Alan said. He didn't wait for Rags to reply before replacing the transmitter. Sarah walked to the weapons rack, grabbed 2 underwater bolt rifles, picked up 2 portable UV flashlights, and brought them to the dais. Alan took one of the rifles in the light without a word. He stared out at the ocean, his face inscrutable. That fucker and I had known each other for 7 years, he said quietly. Didn't even get to say goodbye. Sarah said nothing. She wanted to tell him she understood and that she'd lost soldiers in the sandbox whose names she'd barely known, that she watched her team members get eaten by creatures that looked like they came out of a bad horror movie, and that Givens, the person she considered her closest friend, had died to one of the creatures at Miskatonic. M2 didn't care about friendships, lovers, or anything remotely human. It only consumed. It didn't try to communicate. It didn't try to avoid confrontation. It fought. It attacked. It ate. If it saw you, it wanted to eat you. But it hadn't exactly eaten Hippie, had it? It had used him as an incubator until it had enough. Enough what? Why didn't it just quickly dissolve its host and look for food? Why did it take hours for someone infected by a drop of M2 to be absorbed and give birth to something monstrous? Not even Hollingsworth had devised a good theory to explain that one. She fought a sudden grin. What would he think of this situation? Would he sit on the dais and excitedly throw out theory after theory? Or would he be petrified and unable to move, much less speak? The former, she thought. The man had nearly burned off his hands to kill the creature that had escaped a sample barrel from Liger, and still came back to Miskatonic to study it. Hell, all the scientists had. Even Shauna. In reality, Sarah could say nothing to assuage Alan's grief without sounding patronizing. If she were him, that would be the last kind of bullshit she'd want to hear, let alone from someone she barely knew. Alan looked over at her, his eyes bright with anger, despite the taciturn expression on his face. Stay the bloody course. If that thing comes here, you let me have it. Sarah didn't respond to that apart from blinking. He still didn't understand what an M2 entity the size of Hippie meant. Hell, she didn't know what it would do. What if it found schools of fish around the ship? What if, even now, it was growing to the size of a whale? Alan looked back at the screen and flinched. Shit. Sarah reflexively moved closer to the dais and the screen. Alan's index finger hovered over cam feed 5, but he needn't have bothered. With the rest of the cameras more or less showing static images, the movement was easy to see. The rubble in front of number 5 consisted of several twisted steel supports embedded in a pile of wood and fractured stone. One of the stones, however, jostled from side to side as though being pushed by something beneath it. A moment later, the jagged remains of a 2x4 clumsily moved into place next to it. Another stone joined the objects along with another. Holy shit, Alan said. The fuck is it doing? And how? She didn't know how. How would it do that? Surrounded by a killing field of UV light, any exposure would result in M2 burning up, even underwater. How could it... Fuck me. It must be beneath all that mess, clinging to the undersides of the rocks, giving itself enough shade to work. Alan stared at her. What? She licked her lips as another stone moved into place. It's making itself a shelter, I guess, pulling the material into place to protect itself. Why do that? Alan asked. It was already safe beneath that mess, wasn't it? She shrugged. How the hell would I know? They watched as more fragments of wood and rock seemed to move by themselves in jerky, cautious tugs. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing. In a few minutes, the rearranged pile of rubble created a rough semicircle of wood, stone, and metal. When she squinted her eyes and unfocused on the image, she understood what it had done. An umbrella. It made a fucking umbrella. Alan said. You've gone balmy. At that moment, the mass of material traveled a centimeter before coming to a halt. Fuck me, Alan whispered. The mass moved several centimeters forward, this time with more confidence. A tendril of disturbed sand rose from the rear of the debris umbrella. Hermit crab, she said, eyes still locked on the image. Alan whistled. That's bad. That's really bad, Sarah agreed. She moved from the dais to the port gunwale and looked into the clear water. There it was. Even from this far up, she could see it moving. She heard Alan's footfalls on the deck and turned. He stood beside the oxygen tanks, his hands reaching for the furthest one. Hey, what are you doing? As he shrugged the tank on his back and pulled his mask and rebreather from the rack, he said, Can't hit the fucker from here. She shook her head. Alan, there's no way I'm letting you go down there. He turned and glared at her. If it gets out of that light, we won't find it again. Without the sun, you'll have no... He clicked the UV light several times before nodding to his weapon. I've got the rifle. I've got light. Just have to knock it off its shell before it leaves the array's range. Alan was pulling on a pair of fins. How close do you have to get? She'd already given up trying to talk him out of it. Damn him, but he was right. More than that, he wouldn't listen to her. He wanted payback for Hippie. He shrugged as he primed the rebreather. 2 to 5 meters, I expect. Just have to clip that shell and make it wobbly. Hopefully it'll panic and make things worse. She peered down into the water, immediately spotting the makeshift shell. It had moved a full half meter now. In another 2 minutes or so, it would be beyond the UV killing zone. Alan unfolded the dive deck and it splashed into the water louder than she liked. He stepped on the platform, and when he spoke, she heard the muffled sound of it through his mask. "I'll be on the radio. Comms are active." With that, he dunked himself overboard. Chapter 16. The floodlights cast a yellowish-white aura for several meters around Keko, the glow slowly dissipating into virtually nothing 10 meters down. Anchored over the reef, which plummeted some 40 meters to the ocean floor, Keko floated above a biome teeming with life. The darkness did nothing to keep the fish from their eternal struggles with life and death, the tedious repetition of instincts honed for millions of years of evolution, or the certainty of hunting and being hunted. That night, however, the fish knew something was wrong. A strange presence moved through the darkness, its very existence lighting the nerves and survival instincts of most of the creatures in its vicinity. Fish swam deeper, hid in the tunnels that ran through the giant reef wall, and waited for the interloper to depart. The simpler creatures, coral, sea anemones, and the like, remained blissfully unaware, their physiology too primitive to sense the danger of the new arrival. Every fish, however, was on high alert. A white-tip reef shark lying a bare meter or two from the base of the reef, briefly sated by a meal consisting of a few unlucky members of a spooked school of clownfish, rose a few centimeters from the ocean floor, an instinctual alarm bell ringing in its primitive brain. It swam close to the reef, one fin scraping lightly against the coral. A few clownfish dived into the reef, but not to escape the shark. They had another reason to hide. The white tip halted its progress and floated in the darkness, unsure what to do next. It sensed a larger predator nearby, something that didn't belong, and its nerves vibrated like a live wire. The shark and its small commune had called the reef their home for years, and all smaller fish their prey. Apart from the occasional ill-advised trip beyond the reef, where it faced being a meal for larger sharks, whales, and the like, the white tip had never been afraid. Its home was, after all, home. Even humans dressed in wetsuits, bubbles rising from their rebreathers, spear guns, or cameras in hand, had done little to disturb it and its brethren over the years. The white tip knew the difference between its prey and its predators by the electrical field all life forms emanated. It was how the shark found food in the darkness and knew when to swim away from danger. However, this new presence in its world didn't exude something it recognized. Whatever it was, it cast a field of spikes and jags that leaped across the spectrum and made the fish feel something akin to dread. The shark swam cautiously forward, heading for the reef's edge. Its favorite stalking place, a larger-than-normal crevice that ran through the reef and to the other side, remained a few meters away. The alien presence closed in, and the white tip, no longer concerned about alerting the predator, flew like a missile to its hidey hole. At 1.5 meters in length, it was hardly the largest of its commune, and its narrow physiology allowed it to burst into the crevice, its fins grazing the tunnel's edges. Once inside the 3-meter-long channel running through this side of the reef, it halted. The strange presence seemed to fill the ocean. The white tip should have felt safe, surrounded by the hardy, impenetrable coral, but it didn't. Instead, its prehistoric brain shivered with fear and a desperate need to hide. Unlike most shark species, the white tip did need to move constantly to breathe. That saving grace is why it stayed stationary within its coral fortress, while every instinct told it to swim away as fast as possible. Was the interloper behind it, above it, below it? Or was it lying in wait on the other side, a giant maw opened wide to swallow the white tip once it made it through the reef? Better to stay still and silent. Something tickled its tail, and the shark flinched. A small clownfish swam past the shark at top speed and through to the other side of the reef. The white tip sensed the tiny field rather than saw the fish, but didn't give chase. It wasn't in the mood for a meal. It was worried about survival. Should it follow the fish, though? Why had its prey risked being eaten to get to the other side of the reef? Because something worse than the white tip had been chasing it. The white tip felt a vibration from the wall of coral. The presence closed in, its abnormal electrical field setting off every instinct born of millions of years of evolution. It was time to flee. The shark shot through the tunnel, its muscular tail pushing it forward with incredible acceleration. The white tip popped through the reef and to the other side, but the presence continued to grow. The shark couldn't see in the dark, but it still somehow knew the reef was dying. The coral's life force dissipated while the alien presence grew in strength. The ocean vibrated with the stifling alien aura, and the white-tip's brain froze in utter panic. A mere 2 meters away from the reef, it wasn't far enough away to escape the tentacle that reached through the coral tunnel. Something grasped its tail and yanked backward. The shark jetted urine and feces while it struggled, but whatever held it continued to pull. The white tip, knowing it would die if it didn't get free, turned its head to snap at whatever held it in this death grip. Its jagged teeth clamped onto something like a crab shell, crunched through the armor, and touched a liquid that set its maw on fire. The ocean sizzled with the sound of frying bacon as the shark's lower mandible melted. Pain it had never felt roared through its nervous system. Another limb shot through the coral and wrapped itself like a wad of seaweed around the shark's midsection. In complete panic, the shark squirmed in its burning death throes. The tentacle wrapped around it before transforming into searing, burning acid. The shark's brain died before the rest of the creature stopped twitching. A moment later, the protrusions for the crevice grew in size, adding the white tip's mass to its own. Rags stared overboard, an AR in her hand and a UV light clipped to her belt. Sinclair and Harper were still strategically burning and lighting the animal's stateroom, the stairs, and everywhere Hippie had touched. Even the heavily lacquered and varnished banister had met flame and punishing UV light. She watched them start the process, amazed at how the dark ichor burned like gasoline beneath the touch of flame or a strong pulse of UV. The fact that the drippings used to be her friend, perhaps the only remains they'd ever find, made her ashamed of her ghoulish fascination at watching the stuff burst into sparks of flame. Sarah had said the stuff moved and could locomote. All the video footage she'd seen had made the substance's color seem as dark as a black hole, but this stuff was different, too watery. For some reason, the word immature popped into her mind. Something like that, she thought. It wasn't completely cooked? She shivered. It had hibernated within Hippie, or maybe gestated was the word she was looking for. Regardless, it implied that one touch of the stuff, at least under certain circumstances, could lead to infection. Rags had the feeling the infection was 100% fatal. A large bubble welled and popped just a few meters from the hull. She instinctively aimed the bolt gun at it, knowing the phosphorus-tipped cylinder would hardly go more than a few meters below the surface with any accuracy. Her heart thumped loudly in her ears, and the waves lapping at the ship and the distant calls of night birds on the island faded away. There was just her and the slightly churned water. Another bubble rose and popped, followed by dozens of others. It was as if a portion of the ocean had begun to boil from some unseen heat source, but without the telltale clouds of steam. "Kojo?" Rags called out. The animal walked to her side of the boat, an AR held in his hand and a UV light clipped to the shoulder of his Kevlar and neoprene vest. A quiver of spare bolts thumped against his leg with his steps. "What is it?" She pointed to the churning water. He stared at it, and Rags could see his mind racing. He aimed the AR at the spot and sighted down the barrel. "Do we have a flare?" "We have plenty," she said. "You saw the manifest." He glared at her. "I don't mean phosphorus," he said through his teeth. "Magnesium." She blinked at him before her mouth dropped open. A grin lit her face as she finally understood. Without saying a word, she headed to the emergency kit on the cabin's side. The box contained an emergency medical kit and, more importantly, a tight bundle of magnesium flares along with a flare pistol and 3 cartridges. She scrambled across the deck to stand beside Kojo. He still aimed at the spot, his eyes hard and unblinking, beads of sweat gathering on his forehead. "Got them?" "Yes," she said. "Going to toss one of the small ones onto that spot." Kojo said nothing but gave a slight nod. Rags pulled the striker, and the waterproof flare came to life with a reddish flame and sparks. Rags flung the flare and hit the meter-diameter area of bubbling water. The flare descended, casting a red glow beneath the crystal water that they could easily follow. As it descended into the depths, Kojo stiffened. "What is it?" "Black." The flare completely disappeared from view, but Rags thought something had happened just before it seemed to extinguish itself. A seam of what could have been white sand opened like a mouth and closed just as quickly. "It's big. Big." Rags looked at him. "You think that was it?" His arms trembled slightly as he held the rifle steady. "How many more magnesium flares do you have?" 4. After that, we have the flare gun." "Let's bring up the phosphorus just in case. Please tell Sinclair and Harper to hurry the fuck up, too." He risked a glance at her. I'm not moving. She nodded and ran to the cabin. Harper stood at the top of the stairs, a UV light in her hands, and focused on a sludgy spot on the deck. Harper, Rags called. The woman turned to regard Rags, eyebrows raised in a question. Hurry, we have a hostile. Harper blinked and then nodded with reptilian coldness, still saying nothing. How many magnesium flares do we have? Emergency kit has some. We probably got a small stash. Maybe 10 diving flares? Harper looked perplexed for a short moment and then grinned. I'll get them. Rags left the cabin and headed straight into the hold. The animals' supply crates were in the same position they'd been all along, easy to get to and readily accessible merely by touch. Rags pulled as many cylinders as she could fit into her pockets and vest. Loaded, she grabbed one of the conventional ARs while she was at it. She quickly walked up the steps with the bolt gun slung over her shoulder, the AR in one hand and a spare portable UV floodlight in the other. Kojo, still as a statue, remained staring down the barrel and into the ocean. His hands, however, trembled noticeably. Wary, she approached him slowly. Mate, you there? She said when she was still 2 meters away. He flinched hard before his body relaxed slightly. Got them? He asked in a breathy exhale. She dropped her bolt gun and the floodlight to the deck and placed a phosphorus flare in his tactical vest's front pocket. She lined up another 3 flares in the gunnel rack, meant for beer cans or bottles rather than munitions, before pulling her rifle from her shoulder and aiming at the spot where Kojo pointed his weapon. The water had ceased churning and bubbling like a cauldron. Instead, a few bubbles occasionally popped before the ocean erased them from existence. In mere moments, the bubbling was indistinguishable from the regular ocean. Gone, Kojo said in a hitching voice. Gone. Rags didn't break her stare with the water. What do you mean, gone? He gestured to the water with his barrel, just a slight nudge, but easily recognizable after 5 years of serving with the man. That's where the reef cliff was, he said quietly. For a moment, Rags didn't understand what he meant. Then she remembered the rat in the video and the substances dissolving into the alien thing. Absorb. Grow. Oh, shit, she whispered. A tear rolled down Kojo's cheek, or maybe it was sweat. She couldn't be sure. If that is M2, it will be much larger now. The thing in the church had been enormous. How much had it eaten? Certainly not an entire fucking reef. Rags's bowels felt watery, and nausea tugged at her. Gooseflesh raged over her skin, and the heat of the summer suddenly vaporized into a cold chill. She never wanted to be on land this badly in her life.